The second question we ask of every text is what's difficult? What's hard about this challenging text? Both technically hard to understand, but also what's difficult emotionally, ethically, politically about a text? How are difficulties experienced there? And I think in the last lecture, just looking at the Song of Songs, we've already pointed to a bunch of difficulties. It's difficult because it's old. It's difficult because its origin is complicated, or its provenance, where it came from. Provenance is a fancy word for where did it come from? Well, it came from a bunch of places. Literature, poetry was oral. It wasn't written down for hundreds and hundreds of years, for generations. These beautiful songs were learned by heart, were sung community after community, and over years and years and years got, shaped, got polished like rough stones get polished, and became these little gems that the scribes finally wrote down so that they couldn't change anymore. The provenance is complicated. It came perhaps from Arabic, it came over into the early Israelites that we know as Jewish communities. There were groups from Judah. There were groups from all kinds of places. So provenance is complicated. That's difficult. It seems to have no clear plot. It's not an easy read. It's full of symbols and symbolic language. And those symbols are strange to us. It's also full of both elevated diction, which is fancy words, and strange words. These words, the vocabulary, is not of our world. Precisely, it's not of our world because we live in southern Connecticut. Many of us live in cities or in suburbs in a contemporary 20th, 21st century world. And this is set in an agrarian economy, agrarian farm, a world where people were subsistence farmers, hunters and gatherers. There was no money. There was no Netflix and chill. These were goat herds and farmers, very early farmers. It was an agrarian economy. You'd have to go to, Hebron or the Durham County Fair where the farmers live to get a sense of the smells, of the work, of the importance and awareness of what is growing and what grows that can feed us. And, some of us might have a tomato or basil plant on the back porch, but very few of us have organized our lives these days around the temperature and the seasons and the water and so on and so forth. So these are symbols that are drawn from that agrarian economy that for most of us is a strange world. It's culturally very different. I think it's hard for us with really old texts to put ourselves into the historical moment. I like to imagine how these really were used as oral text, as oral literature. Again, no one was reading, no one was looking at books. They had these in their hearts and they had these on their tongues. And we know at least about the wasifs, these Arabic love poems, that this is how it worked, right? The men, by and large, spent their days out with the herds, out with their goats or sheep. They tended these animals from which they got food, meat. They got hair, sheep that turned into clothing. They got milk from goats. And so in the morning, the guys would get up and they'd go out with their herds. They'd spend all day largely alone or in very small groups watching over these goats. Maybe if they were lucky, they would have a slingshot or a spear of some kind, and they would get a rabbit that went by or a bird or, heaven forbid, larger game to bring back to eat. There was hunting going on. Meanwhile, back at the camp, the women hung out with the kids. They cultivated grains, kinds of millet, They looked for fruit. When they found a vineyard, they grew fruit on trees. They looked for honey, because that was a source of sweetness. Apples were a source of sweetness. But by and large, between kids and food, they were pretty camp bound. And so women are spending their time with the kids in the morning, men are off, and then at night, the guys come home, in come the sheep, in come the goats. They hang out, and before them, they've laid down these massive pots of mushy food and flatbreads. It's time to eat. And it's important to remember how gender segregated these communities. There was men's work and there was women's work. So the men would be hanging out on one side of the circle and the women are hanging out on the other side, and everybody eats and the kids are quieted down and the sheep are finally and the goats are settling in. And what happens next? Well, what happens next is somebody picks up something to pling and plong and they start singing to each other. The Song of Songs, these poems were probably sung. And you can imagine a bunch of guys on one side of the circle, sitting. There's some, 17-year-olds, 20-something-olds. They're not married yet, trying to get lucky. And so, plum, 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 quiet, quiet, belly's full. Over across the fire, there's some hotties. And what does he do? Actually, the women start. Oh, that you would kiss me with the kisses of your mouth, for your love is better than wine. Wink, 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 wink. Your anointing oils are fragrant. You smell good. Your name is oil poured out. You really smell good. Therefore the maidens love you. Draw me after you. Let us make haste. Ha 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 ha. You hot hunk of man. And then back at them before long, the guys come back and say, oh, my beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms, the vineyards of En-Gedi. Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves, wink, wink. Behold, you are beautiful, my beloved, truly lovely. She's flirting with him, and he comes right back flirting at her. And on the evening goes. So it's really difficult for us to put ourselves back into the context of what it would be like to be a goat herd in the year 650 BCE on the mountains on the edge of Lebanon and Syria. But that's a little glimpse. And when we know that, oh my gosh, it suddenly becomes much clearer. These are sexy, flirtatious love poems that are bouncing back and forth between men who are singing them to court and arouse, and between women who are flirting right back. Look at me, I'm the one you should be looking at. And what about the older men and the older women? They're sitting there too, and they're chuckling to themselves, and they're enjoying the beautiful flirtations of those sweet young women and those dear young men. And they're getting, they're getting aroused. They're getting turned on. So as the fire dims and the night quiets, everybody can go back to their tent and do what bodies like to do when they are both enamored, in love, and ready to be close and intimate with a beloved. So it's difficult to put us back, but oh my goodness, once you imagine that this is writing of flirtation, this is writing of early evening foreplay even, it suddenly becomes much clearer and brings us right away into some of the things that are really interesting in the text. And they're coming right up.